all participants? Perfect. All right, we are now recording. Ding. All right, hello, fellow Rotarians. My name is Reed Miller, and I am your president of the Rotary Club of Portland. Welcome to your weekly membership meeting. I will now ask that you will virtually stand and join me in reciting the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Okay, thank you. At this time, I'll ask any Rotarians who have invited a guest to please raise a hand so that you can introduce your guest to the club. If you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself, or let us know that you're here in the chat box. Do we have any guests today?
Unmute. Danielle, do you want to introduce your guest, please?
Yes, Funda Kelsey is able to join us again after some leave this summer and is looking at joining our club. She's one of the owners of Premier Jets and has been a longtime Rotarian that would like to transfer to our club. Welcome, Funda.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Very good. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. And of course, thank you to all of our members for joining us here today for another Zoom meeting. We have made it to the football season. For some of you, that is a great thing. For others, this is more of a difficult time. And for me, I can't wait to see what the Seahawks can put together this year. And we'll have more follow-up on that, I'm sure, next week. We'll see what happens there. But we do have a full agenda today, so I want to make sure that we can jump in and get everything done on time today. So looking forward to a fantastic meeting, and we'll jump right into the reflection. All right, I'd now like to welcome Rotarian Michael Arthur, who will be presenting this week's reflection. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, President Reed. Good afternoon, Rotarians, Funda, and any other guests we might have. Tuesday, September 7, as we again approach another anniversary of the 4 9/11 airline hijack attacks, I'm reminded and encouraged that Rotary is an international organization. While I so often focus on our club, our members, our committees, and our activities, I also know that we contributed to the formation of the United Nations, have helped eradicate polio around the world, sponsor international and student exchanges, help send relief abroad when natural disasters occur, and sponsor international economic projects and peace fellowships, among other international endeavors reaching beyond our club. This upcoming 9/11 anniversary seemingly is attracting more attention, being the 20th anniversary, and maybe also seeing the withdrawal of international military troops from Afghanistan. Some of you may know that 20 years ago, I was in New Jersey on the banks of the Hudson River with a direct view of the Twin Towers and had no choice really but to stay into the aftermath. 20 years later, most of us remember where we were when we learned of the attacks, and many of us have learned more about the events and experiences from those who survived. Today, I make mental note of the bravery and humanitarian responses many showed in the crisis, ordinary citizens as well as the firefighters and the EMTs. I also appreciate the messages of those who share how their priorities, spirits, and approach to life was radically changed by the experience of the unexpected tragedy. Often they tell us for the better. Finally, for our reflection, I hope that we may all find some time to each pause and reflect on all those who were directly involved, perished and surviving. And may we never forget or cease to learn from the lessons we are given. May God continue to bless us all. Thank you, Reed.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate that. That was a very thoughtful reflection, very timely. and something that we can all certainly reflect on. So thank you so much. If any other Rotarians are interested in giving a reflection in the future, you can reach out to Susan, who's in charge of the scheduling of the reflections. Her email is 2navycaptains@gmail.com and will be dropped in the chat right now. Thank you, Skylar, for dropping that in the chat. And now a quick note on the golf tournament. I'd like to introduce Rotarian Nihad Awida to speak to you about your golf tournament, which will be happening this Thursday.
Good morning, guys. It's me, and I'm talking about the golf event that is happening on Thursday. We're only looking for about 2 or 3 players if possible because of last minute cancellation. At the same time, if you say I don't play golf, but I would like to do something, we're looking for volunteers. That will be great. You can help us at the registration table, or you can be the sponsor of the first prize winner, second prize winner, whatever thing you can do. If you have any question, please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to help and give you ideas how you can contribute. Be well, and hopefully we'll see you guys on Thursday at 11:30. Tea time is at 1:30. Talk to you soon, guys.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Nihad. I am looking forward to the golf tournament as always. It's always a great time out there. And now I'd like to welcome Rotarian Terry Goldman, who serves as the chair of our membership committee. A huge job, and he's doing a wonderful job. And Terry, please welcome and give us a membership committee update.
Thank you, President Reed. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody, for today's announcement, we're going to look at a quick video that was put out by our district. And so I just want you to enjoy this video with me that talks about the power of one and how each of us can make a difference by inviting one person to join our club this next year. So let's watch together. So that's it. Sorry you heard me talking to somebody else there for just a brief moment, but appreciate you all. That's it. But just think of one person that you can have join our club, and we will double in size by the end of the year. So thank you, President Reed.
Thank you so much, Terry. Awesome message. I think we can all get behind one person. I think that's an easy goal we can accomplish. I think everybody should jump on that and put some serious thought into who that one person might be. Thank you so much, Terry, for the update from the membership committee. And now a quick update on our in-person meetings. We do continue to closely monitor COVID-19 and follow our local and state guidelines. And after a lot of discussion amongst the leadership team and the board of directors, we have decided to hold off on in-person meetings for the time being. We are continuing to follow CDC guidelines. And, we want to do everything that we can to get back to in-person meetings as quickly as possible. But we, first and foremost, we need to look out for the safety and the comfort of our members and make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So that's of utmost concern. And so we'll continue to do these virtual meetings for the time being, and that will be continue to be closely monitored and discussed, and we'll get back to in-person meetings as quickly as we're able to do so in a safe manner. All right, that's what we've got for our update on the in-person meetings, and now it's time for our breakout rooms. So we're gonna. All right, welcome back. I hope you all had a great conversation in your breakout room and enjoyed the opportunity to interact with your fellow Rotarians. And now please welcome Rotarian Dev Dion as your chair of the day. Welcome, Dev.
Thank you, Reed. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Agustin Enriquez. His Rotary resume includes the president of the club several years ago. And Agustin, I think you were one of the founders of the U40 group. So hats off to you for putting that great group together. Agustin is a design principal at Gbd Architects, and he specializes in mixed-use urban buildings, often pursuing ambitious efforts to reduce a building's consumption of energy and natural resources. He has led design efforts of award-winning work at Kiln Apartments and the Maryhill Museum of Art, their expansion and renovation, and AQQA, corporate Touchmark's corporate headquarters. Agustin is really a leader in the area of architecture, and he's going to talk to us today about what's going on in the Portland market from an architectural perspective, commercial, residential, and so forth. And it's a nice follow-up to Blake St. Ange's presentation last week. Agustin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dev. Somebody give me the thumbs up here when the screen gets shared. That way I know. I think I've got that. Yes. Is everybody seeing the screen? Maybe I can see you, Dev, if you thumbs up. Is that okay? Great. So thank you, Dev, for that introduction. Today, what I thought would be kind of interesting would be to have it be a follow-up to Blake's conversation about what is being seen in the downtown Portland market from an architect's perspective. Blake gave us a really good overview from a very specific commercial office space, in particular what landlords are seeing and what tenants are seeing, and I don't know if depressing was the right word, Blake, but it's been definitely a difficult environment from an office perspective. So from an architect's perspective, let me hear just, there we go, and see if I can't get this. There we go. Okay. So it's really this follow-up to Blake's talk. I have to give a shout out to Blake. Thank you for putting a GBD project on the first image that you shared. This is a renovation that GBD did for US Bancorp Tower years ago, renovating their office space. So moving forward a little bit about GBD Architects, I'll just, in order for this to give it some context, I'll describe a little bit about who we are at GBD Architects, what we do, and where we do it, specifically geographically, and then dive into Portland in a little bit more detail. But our firm was started in 1969, so they've been a long time contributor to the Portland region from the built environment, and there are 75 to 80 of us. So for those that aren't involved in the design industry in Portland, that's relatively large. We're not the largest, but we're probably in the top 4 or 5 firms just in terms of scale and size. So just to provide a little bit of background on, we see quite a bit just by the sheer nature of how large we are and the number of different clients we have in the region. Our firm is focused on, we have 3 different service sectors. So the biggest chunk of what we do is architecture, but we also do interior design and master planning. So on the architecture side, that usually accounts for probably 70% of the projects in the office, or the sort of the fee volume that we have. So, and that's really where I'll touch base on for the most of part of today. Interior design and master planning both have been they've done okay during the last 18 months. But really where the firm affects the city and the region the most is certainly through our architectural projects. And while we do a lot of different kind of work, so we'll do occasionally a school, and Deb had mentioned I designed a museum, and we've done work for universities. The bulk of what we do, so the vast majority of what we do, are what we would think of as private sector developer oriented work. So when we talk about multifamily, that would be residential buildings where either they're condominiums like the Casey condos, this is in the Pearl District, or apartments. This is a project in Northwest Portland called the Cato. That would be, we would commonly have 2 to 3 of those types of projects in the office at a time. Maybe more than that, especially on the apartments. We were developing quite a lot of apartments in the last 10 years. We also do a lot of ground up office buildings. We were talking a little bit on our breakout session about the timbers, but here's where the timbers play. And so that's a new office building that we had completed last year called Canvas. So that's a market that we in the Portland region would do as many new office buildings as anybody. That's a huge sector of our business. And then finally, hotels. This is a hotel and office, mixed use building, hotel and office for Radisson in downtown Portland. So those are our 4 sectors, and that would be, thinking about what Blake talked about last week, that would be commercial speculative work, meaning work that is oftentimes done for a developer or a property owner without the end, this is our jargon, but without the end user actually sitting at the table. So for example, if you're designing somebody's house, often you're designing it with them, or in the case of an office building, if we were to take, say, Adidas headquarters, you're building it specifically for Adidas. We do some of that, but we do a whole lot more private sector developer work, meaning they're building the building to ultimately have it be worth a little bit more than they put into it, and then fill it up afterwards. So that's the core segment of our of where we're at, of the kind of work that we do. Okay, so I grabbed a couple slides off our website. So this just gives you a sense of, these are all the projects on our website, and Portland is really where we work. We historically have done 70 to 80% of our fee volume in Oregon, and almost all of that, the vast majority of that's in Portland. So I've heard other firms refer to us and Gbd Architects as Portland's architect, because we spend so much of our time working and designing buildings in Portland. And if we zoomed in a little bit closer, it kind of honestly breaks down into where the taller high-rise buildings in the city are. So whether that's Lloyd District, South Waterfront, we've done a number of buildings, downtown Portland, and then the Pearl and Northwest. So it kind of clusters. While we do work in other areas, we really spend a lot of our time doing new construction, ground up buildings in sort of the larger, denser parts of downtown Portland. Okay, so last week, after Blake's conversation, the question was posed to us of, what is Gbd experience in Portland's commercial real estate during COVID-19, and what does the immediate future look like? So we'll look at each of those 4 sectors on what we've seen. And certainly there are other architects like us, but we would really be a really good stand-in for many of the larger commercial oriented architects in Portland. So if we kind of looked at, I'll talk about each sector a little bit. A traditional market for us is multifamily condominiums. This is a shot of South Waterfront. So you can see here's OHSU, a new OHSU building, and then many of the taller buildings here were designed as condominiums. Gbd did 3 of the condos and 1 of the apartment projects. Interestingly, this isn't COVID-19 specific, but after the last recession where condominiums were really common, really at the recession of 2008-9 and bleeding into 2010, the number of new condominiums in Portland really plummeted. That was the recession was very tough on the for sale multifamily market. And a lot of developers ended up losing their buildings back to banks. And so while we've seen a couple of condominium buildings in Portland. There's really been hardly any. I don't think COVID has changed that much, but in the last 10 years, GBD, I can't think of a single condominium project GBD's done in Portland. We've done one in Colorado, but what the region saw was when a developer had the opportunity to do a multifamily condominium building or multifamily apartment building, 99 times out of 100, developer chose to do the apartment buildings. It's just a less litigious market, and it was very robust in Portland. Apartments really, you really couldn't build the demand that we were seeing in the marketplace. So what are we seeing in the multifamily apartment market in the Portland region? This is a graph that's showing from 2010 up until 2018, the number of new apartment projects. And the graph doesn't show 2007, 8, 9, but what you would see was there really weren't a lot of apartments built during 2007, 2008, 2009 in comparison to condominiums, because there was much more money being made there. There were apartments, but there weren't a lot. After the recession, there just wasn't very much work happening, 2010, 2011, even bleeding into 2012. But you can see there was a real pent-up demand for apartments, and any of us here that live in Portland, we're seeing cranes and in every neighborhood, downtown, east side, inner east side, west side. You just saw many of the projects that we saw were apartments, and it was just going and going and going. It was a very robust market. Our business was very busy doing apartments. And in 2017, the city of Portland adopted a new state rule allowing for mandating inclusionary housing. So that's what these color codes down here are: pre-inclusionary housing units and post-inclusionary housing units. What inclusionary housing requires is any new construction of multifamily units of larger than 20 units. So if you have a 100-unit building, there's more than 100 apartments in a building, that's more than 20 apartments, then you're required to provide affordable housing in the building or pay into a fund. And I think the goal with that is laudable, providing affordable housing in the city. The challenge with it was it meant that the affordable housing units, which are rent controlled, you needed really the other rents in the building on the market rate units to pay for the loss of income that the affordable housing units otherwise would have paid. So, and I think everybody at the city and the state level recognized that there was going to need to be an adjustment, the period, meaning that there would be a period where, somewhat ironically, the market rate units, the rent on those market rate units were going to need to appreciate to cover the gap of the loss of rent for the affordable housing units. And at the time, the theory was that might take 2 or 3 years. And so when this slide was put together, that's what they were seeing, was that the production of apartments really started to, these are permits, so these aren't actually built, but the design and permitting of apartments really started to plummet. What's not showing here is 2019, 20, and ultimately 2021, and this actually has just keep going down. So the short of all that is the inclusionary housing unit policy, we really need, somewhat sadly, but we really need rents to appreciate overall on the market rate units in order to pay for the affordable housing units. So it's a long-winded answer of saying there really haven't been multifamily apartments being designed and constructed in the 18 months during COVID. We have seen some projects finishing out construction, but very few new buildings being designed in the last 18 months. So another sector, so if we talk multifamily, the other sector would be new office buildings. So this is a competitor to Cresa, who Blake works for, but this is Joan Lang's JLL, and they put out a chart every quarter, every year describing the Portland supply. These would be new office buildings, ground up new construction office buildings being delivered into the marketplace. So what you're seeing here is in 2000, it starts at 2020, but you're seeing a number of really very large buildings. These are all 100,000 square feet or larger. which in the Portland market, 100,000 square feet is a lot. And so what we saw in 2020 was a number of large office buildings that were under construction being delivered to the marketplace. Nothing delivered in 2021, but in 2022, we have really significant buildings also being delivered. Galleria 11W, which is a sister building to 12W in downtown Portland, the West End, as well as Block 216. And so what Blake had described previously was that last week was that there's a lot of office vacancy, and what we're seeing is you still got, nearly 400,000 square feet coming online, which in Portland, 400,000 square feet is a lot of new office space. And the short way of saying that is it's unlikely that we're going to see a lot of new office buildings being designed for the speculative market, meaning build an office building without a tenant and allow it to fill up over time, primarily because we've got a lot of supply coming online in the Portland region, and this is downtown Portland specifically. But in addition to that, the developer clients and investors that we typically work for, there's still a lot of concern about what the work from home dynamic is going to mean. Does that mean that we need a little bit less office space overall? In which case, conceptually, and this is what Blake had talked about last week, conceptually, we might have 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 years worth of existing inventory that the Portland economy really just needs to continue to grow and grow and grow and take up the existing office space before new office buildings could be developed. So we haven't really seen a lot of new speculative office buildings, and nobody has hired us in the last 18 months to do that during COVID-19 to deliver new office space. So hospitality is the last category there of kind of traditional commercial office. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, assuming we don't really need to talk about if GBD has had a lot of interest in new hotels being developed in Portland. And the little subscript is there that no, our phones are not ringing for new hotel space. If we were to go back in time pre-COVID, actually, and I saw Terry Goldman on the call today, but if we go back 2 or 3 years ago, the number of new hotel units that Portland was seeing was as robust as any period in Portland's 100-year history. I mean, the number of new hotel units that were being designed, being built, and coming online was really unprecedented. I had heard, I don't know if I have the stat slightly off, but I had heard that in the last 5-ish years of Portland, there was about 50% of all hotel units that had been designed and constructed in all of Portland happened in the last 5-10 years. So the amount of new hotel rooms was really intense. I mean, there were a lot of new hotel units being developed. Okay, so if we weren't doing any of our traditional markets, meaning we weren't really getting a lot of calls for multifamily apartments, multifamily condos, office, and hospitality, what were we doing? And I'm kind of reminded of, one of Plato's quotes here, that necessity is the mother of invention. We had scrambled a little bit last year, but even prior to that, when inclusionary housing was passed and we had seen a lot of inclusionary housing, a lot of market rate apartment projects just simply weren't going on, we had pivoted a little bit and started looking for other types of projects. So I would categorize in terms of the kind of traditional core markets that GBD was working in. We had pivoted, and our revenue was coming from really 4 different areas. And so I'll kind of talk about those very high level. One, we were finishing projects. So on the far left, really large projects that, I guess for a frame of reference, a project we're doing, the Gbd Architects is doing the Block 216 where the Ritz-Carlton is going in, tower in downtown Portland. It's a little less than 1 million square feet. It's 900,000 and something square feet. For Portland, downtown Portland, this is among the largest developments in the history of downtown. Huge project. A project like that typically takes a year and a half to design, and that project will be under construction for like 3 years. So a project that we might start could take, a modest sized project for us might take 2.5, 3 years from the time it starts to the time we are done with it, up to a project like this could take 4 or 5 years. So fair amount of the last 18 months is honestly just finishing projects that were already in the tail end of design or already under construction. So a couple examples of that would be, Block 216, the Ritz-Carlton Tower there. We got a couple of projects in Los Angeles that were, large $100 million size, $100 million developments that were in design, ready for permit or under construction. So we finished those up. Another project in Lake Oswego, apartment projects. But just as an example, that's a fair amount of revenue and a fair amount of work for us, just finishing projects that are already going. Another interesting dynamic are projects that have what I would categorize as alternative funding strategies for us. Kept going. So this is we were designing the renovation of the Multnomah County Courthouse. So here in the second image there, that project has a couple of different alternative funding strategies. One is historic tax credits. So that really helps developers pro forma to get the historic tax credits on projects like that. It's a national landmark, so historic building. We also have, Portland is super unique in the nation in that we have something called Opportunity Zone funds. And Opportunity Zone, without getting into the real nitty gritty of it, Opportunity Zone zones throughout the nation are areas that have been designated as, gosh, what would be the right word? It's not blight, but areas that are ripe for development based off census tract data, where capital gains, either from the sale of a business or the sale of property, capital tax can be avoided if those funds are then put into real estate development in certain census tracts. The city of Portland, nearly all of downtown Portland and much of the Central East Side actually is in an opportunity zone, which is really unusual. The rest of the nation didn't do that. Portland did, and so that allows projects that otherwise would be infeasible. It gives an opportunity for some developers to pool some of that money together into something called an opportunity zone fund, and then actually fund projects. So this project that you're seeing here, Multnomah County Courthouse, as well as River Place, can use opportunity zone funds. And the benefit of that is projects that otherwise really wouldn't be moving forward now look like they could be moving forward. The third area that GBD has seen a fair amount of work, probably the most robust area that we've seen, is master planning. So those would be large sites when you've got, the image that's shown here is along the waterfront. Just off screen here is the marina, so downtown Portland. There's 8 acres here in the center that GBD has been planning for a number of years, and taking large tracts of land and then master planning future developments. We saw a really robust number of phone calls and clients asking us to, hey, they know that in the next year or two, they maybe can't launch a building project, but they can start planning for them. So we've seen projects in the 8 acres at River Place, larger tracts in Northeast Portland. We've been working in Wood Village. We've got a client that's got quite a lot of property in Carlton, Oregon. We've been planning for him. And the Blue Heron Mill for the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, we've also been working with them. So very robust sector for us has been master planning, which historically we've always done, but we haven't done as many projects. And during COVID-19, that became pretty common. And then finally, almost just by necessity, we have ended up the work, well, we haven't done there's not a tremendous amount of work in Portland proper. Things just outside of Portland, we've seen quite a bit of work. So we've got one project that's just about under construction in Carlton, Oregon, along with 3 or 4 more out here moving forward. And these also happen to be hospitality focused projects. So bed and breakfast and hotels, where Carlton, Oregon looks to be a prime location to develop hotels. We've got projects in Washington County that are just outside of the Portland market that don't have inclusionary housing and don't have some of the other let's say perceived challenges with downtown Portland. Projects in Oregon City. We've gone across the river now. We've done a few projects in the past in Vancouver, Washington, but we've got 2 going on right now, maybe 3 large scale projects that, again, don't have the affordable housing and they don't have some of the other perceived challenges with downtown Portland. And then we have a really massive project in Perry, Arizona that similarly doesn't have the kind of reputation nationally right now that Portland is struggling with. And I was hoping to leave, I say I got some chats, but I was hoping to leave some time here for questions. So maybe let's see. Okay, one from Terry Goldman, 17 new hotels in the last 5 years. Yeah, it's really been an unprecedented market in hotels, as well as there was a question there just about how sales are going in Ritz-Carlton. They just opened up. They have been a couple sales, actually, I think I saw in the last week or two. Of new condominiums. So I think they've sold, I think 2 or 3. They've still got, I mean, it's still, I think that project doesn't deliver for another 2 years. So you can imagine buying a house and then waiting for the house, you know, for another 2 years. So that usually ramps up in the last, 6 to 9 months of construction. Condominiums is historically what we've seen.
We do have time for a couple of questions. So Wesley, would you like to ask yours first?
Yes, thanks, Augustine. Really interesting presentation. What is your project in Oregon City and what's the timeline?
Sure, that is the project for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and that is at the old Blue Heron Mill. And so right in the middle of, we finished a vision document last year that their tribal council approved, and now we're continuing to work on the master plan. And incredible site. Actually, it'd be a fun thing for Rotary to do, to see if we couldn't arrange a tour to walk out there. I mean, it's just a remarkable piece of property, and the falls, when you can actually get out to them, is just really incredible. So that's what we're working on, Wes. And I don't have a timeline for when buildings might actually start to come out of the ground there.
Well, I second your suggestion.
Dion?
Augustine, a question that was touched on last week was the lack of really big buildings in Vancouver with 100,000 square foot footprints for clients. Do you see Vancouver, with everything going on in the Portland market, do you see these big projects coming to Vancouver?
Well, we've got the 2 projects we have there going on right now. One is actually in the waterfront, and it's a senior living facility. So we're working on that. So that doesn't fill an office need, but it's a pretty good sized project. The waterfront is really fundamentally, the perception of the waterfront is really fundamentally different than downtown Vancouver. It feels a little bit different, sort of like South Waterfront feels different from downtown Portland. Not better or worse, it just feels like its own little neighborhood pocket. New office buildings in Vancouver, and Blake touched on this a little bit. It's fascinating to think about. Because there's an interesting dynamic, because there's not a lot of large office buildings coming out of the ground with a speculative office building, and you can't point to 10 other speculative office buildings that are successful. There's kind of it's almost one of those chicken and the egg conversations of like, well, if I can't point to 10 in the past, and banks and lenders are, let's say they're risk averse, and they kind of want to point to 9 or 10 that have been successful before they launch a new one. That's a little bit of a challenge. So we've talked to a few people about doing larger scale office buildings in downtown Vancouver, but really haven't seen them move forward, Dev. So I'm actually not really sure. I kind of think the Portland market's going to come back faster for new office buildings than we're going to start to see larger scale development in Vancouver. One of the challenges, honestly, with downtown development, especially in a place like Vancouver, is how you meet the parking demand. So like in Portland, our transit and the bike culture and the ability to get to the office building requires just honestly a quarter or a third of the amount of parking that you would see in a Vancouver location. And parking, sort of sad to say this, but parking typically drives architectural solutions and development. So that's why you'll see a lot more projects in say along Cruise or in suburbs or in suburban Vancouver, because land is cheap and you can build surface parking that just frankly doesn't cost that much. Going underground is really a rule of thumb here, Dev, would be an underground parking stall in the Portland metro area costs roughly $60,000, $60,000 to $80,000 each parking stall. When you go underground and you're digging that out and building the concrete. I mean, it's sort of a shocker, but that's kind of the rough metric for underground parking, $60,000 to $80,000 per stall.
And Chris has a question. Unmute, Chris.
Okay, So this is a follow-up to the Oregon City question. How does your project with the tribe tie into, or is it actually overlying the Riverwalk?
Yeah, it's a good question because there is a fair amount of confusion there. I think just the way that the Riverwalk was unveiled. So the Riverwalk is quite literally along the river. So it would be, and don't quote me on this, but it'd be 50 to 75 feet of land along the river that the property owner, the tribe has purchased the property. The property owner owns and controls, and the Riverwalk is basically an easement that allows the improvements along the river to happen. And so whether that's, paths or trails or bridges or whatever those connections are, that's what the Riverwalk specifically is, and culminates in an area down by the falls and the refurbishment of some of the mill buildings at the end. The Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde still own all the property. Our project has been inboard of that. So it would be all of the development within the site that is not within that easement area. And we've certainly have taken a look at and collaborated with a number of stakeholders about what happened, how those two things interact, because it could be blurry where the edge of development meets the edge of the Riverwalk. And so that's all still very much in process. But our work specifically has been on creating a vision for the land inboard of the Riverwalk.
We have time for one last question from Danielle.
Thank you. Great to hear from you again, Augustine. From probably a year and a half ago, when we were doing the Thursday late afternoon chats, one of the things that I remember that you said your firm was doing had to do with the internal design of office space. So I have two questions. Because of COVID, are you still thinking about, well, I'm sure you are still thinking about flow of traffic and who is close to or next to whom and where is reception, et cetera. And then I have my second question is about residential. So in the office buildings and condos, if a lot of the folks that have had the larger homes are wanting to downsize and like the idea of the Portland area, but are looking long term, are a lot of those apartments and condos all set up to be like, I don't know, 3-bedroom or so on one floor? How is that? How is the design of residential for future and design of commercial office for future affecting how your firm and your folks are planning?
Okay, so I'll tackle those one by one. So the first question was about COVID and thinking about actually working in an office space and how that has been different over the last 18 months and then moving forward. And so the answer to that question is, when COVID-19 first came about, there was a lot of conversation about, okay, what is the office workplace design of the future, and keeping people spread out and masks and work from home. And what we have seen is not a lot of existing buildings and existing tenants making significant changes, primarily because people couldn't actually get back into the office. The state of Oregon was and Multnomah County were among the most restrictive in the country. And so there wasn't a lot of we were not seeing a lot of active renovations during COVID-19 within office space. We had done a number of studies of how to have 6 feet of distance and new air filters or new mechanical spaces, and still are doing a little bit of that, but not a lot. I think what we are seeing much more, though, compared to, if we kind of separate COVID-19 from work from home, because it does definitely feel like something has changed, and businesses have now seen how a work from home dynamic can work. And I would caveat that with saying, since everybody's doing it, it's a little bit different. I think when we see a more hybrid approach where we've got some people at home and some people in the office, because that really hasn't been what's been happening. It's been the vast majority of people have been at home. And so we haven't seen what actually happens when you have a large segment of the population in the office and a large segment of population at home, that hybrid model and what that actually does to work culture and how things happen. We haven't seen that. And there's going to be an interesting dynamic of how businesses maintain their office culture when they're not physically in the same, when you have a split, some people are working and some people are not physically. And so I think we're seeing a lot more conversation about that, Daniil, honestly, of what does that mean going forward? And does everybody still get a desk if they come in for 1 day a week? And so actually, ironically, that's even more space, which is sort of a head scratcher. But if everybody still has a desk and now you need to have more meeting space to handle, when people do come in, you haven't actually reduced the amount of square footage, which is sort of odd. And in addition, you now also have an office space where, just hypothetically say 30% of the office is just simply not full because they're just not there. You have this odd, always feeling slightly empty feeling in your office space. So there's actually been a fair amount of conversation in our office with office tenants about that. Does it feel good when you only have 50, 60% of your office occupying their desk moving forward? So the second question was, I think it was centered around empty nesters and if we're seeing a lot of 3-bedroom condominium apartments, and the answer to that is no. It's very unusual to be designing 3-bedroom condominiums or apartments. Primarily the square footage in the space, the end result of that tends to be much more expensive units than people are willing to pay for. Now, I'll caveat that with saying condominiums tend to be, well, not tend, they're almost always larger than apartments. But it would be very unusual for somebody to sell, I'll make up some numbers here, a 2,500 square foot or a 3,000 square foot house, and then buy a 2,500 or 3,000 square foot condominium. That would be, I can't actually think of a case where that happens. A 3,000 square foot condominium typically is a penthouse unit that would be, typically the person that's buying a 3,000 square foot apartment or condominium or renting an apartment is downsizing from a much larger home, ironically, than that. So we are seeing more 2-bedroom apartments, and we are now starting to design 3-bedroom apartments, which we almost never did historically in the past, but that's a specific result actually of inclusionary housing and providing affordable housing units for families, because family-sized units are actually more cost-effective to build than 1-bedrooms and studios on a per square foot basis, primarily because what you've done is you for the amount of square footage you're building, a bedroom is relatively cheap compared to building another kitchen. So if you kind of thought about it that way, you've got less kitchens, less bathrooms, more in the same amount of square footage, and so they tend to be less costly, and it's a nice way actually to get more affordable housing units. And I can see I'm talking a lot, so.
All right, yeah, we got to wrap this up. I apologize, Augustine, but I was really enjoying hearing from you there, so I didn't want to cut you off too early, but we do have to wrap this thing up. So thank you for the awesome presentation today, and thank you so much, Carol, for facilitating our questions. We will be meeting right here back on Zoom at noon on Tuesday, September 14th. And don't forget, if you have any speaker ideas, please do submit those to Dev Dion of our program committee. And I want to thank our guests who joined us today. Funda, thank you so much for stopping by. We welcome you back anytime. Michael Arthur, thank you so much for your thoughtful reflection on 9/11. And thank you to our chair of the day, Dev Dion. And of course, thank you so much, Augustine, for your presentation. I enjoyed learning about GBD and the work you do there, and the follow-up on Blake's presentation, what's going on right now, and how COVID has impacted your industry. So thank you so much, Augustine. And we may have to take you up on that invitation for the tour out there at the falls. And thank you also to everybody behind the scenes today. Thank you to Skylar, thank you to Angel, thank you to Carol, and thank you to all of our committee chairs and our members for everything that you do. And as we close today's meeting, let's remember why we are here. We serve to change lives. Let's continue to focus on the lives that we change and continue to step up and to do the right thing. Thank you so much for joining, and this meeting is adjourned.